This is episode 37 of Kratom Sobriety. My name is Charlie. In this episode, we have an interview with a family member who had a relative who died from a kratom-caused death. This was determined by the medical examiner and the toxicology reports. To start off, we're going to review a scientific paper that I referenced in the earlier episode. This study was co-authored by Dr. Christopher McCurdy and several of his peers. It is a preprint and is still going under peer review, but I will put a link to it in the show notes, as well as you can look at the original data sources from the Florida police. In this paper, this is with their methodology. Using the Florida Department of Law Enforcement database, we retrospectively analyzed de-identified data of deaths related to kratom use in Florida in 2020 and 2021. This is a summary of their findings. 550 people had kratom-related deaths during those 2 years. In 353 of the 550, 64.18% of those cases, the medical examiners determined kratom to be a cause of death through autopsy, urine, and toxicological reports. Most had polysubstance use. There was only 21 cases of kratom alone deaths. So this means that kratom-related deaths, there's usually three types. The first is when kratom is the only substance in their system. As you can see, this is relatively rare. In Florida during these 2 years, there's about 10 of these cases per year. The second category is when they determine that kratom caused the death, but there was co-ingestance with them. And this was 65% of the cases in these 2 years. This is very common in drug overdoses. Most involve polysubstance abuse and are not single drug deaths. And then the third category of deaths are ones where kratom is found to be in the system, but not the cause of death. And that's roughly the other third. The story we have to share today is in the second category, where the autopsy determined kratom was the cause, but there was also some other substances. In this case was the prescription of gabapentin. Kratom advocates will almost universally say, that's not a kratom death. It was gabapentin's fault or some other health condition. Stop blaming kratom. Death determination is a complicated process. Medical examiners don't get it all right. There is potential for both overcounting of deaths for certain causes, and there's also the potential for undercounting of death, the attribution of death to certain causes. So I'll read verbatim the conclusion of this study. Quote, Mitragynine-associated death instances, or MADI, is indeed a legitimate, serious public health concern. Our results have provided evidence of the adverse effects associated with using kratom, mostly in combination with other substances, primarily intoxication and death. As more people utilize kratom, more research is needed to elucidate the role of kratom and its alkaloids, particularly mitragynine, in drug intoxication and whether it exacerbates symptoms in people with cardiovascular, neurocognitive, and respiratory disorders. The co-use of other drugs, particularly opioids, increase the risks of death from kratom use. The FDA warns the public not to use kratom due to its high risk of abuse, dependence, addiction, and even death. Until clinical trials establishing safe doses and abuse potential are conducted, this most certainly will remain the position of the FDA. Unquote. I grew up in a period with silly DARE assemblies and Nancy Reagan telling people, exaggerating the harms of drugs. And that is wrong. But on the other end of the spectrum, it's also wrong to under-warn people about potential risk. And that's the case with kratom. You know, life is about relative risks. From all I can tell, it's still more dangerous to drive a car in America. I think it's like 1 in 93 chance that you might die from an auto accident. But this mass delusion and myth making that nobody's ever died from kratom is just simply untrue. The stories of those people are important. They shouldn't be dismissed. And that's why we have the interview today. Welcome, everybody. We have a special interview this week with Kayla Martinez, whose mother had a very negative experience with Kratom, and we're going to get into that over the interview. Before we talk about the more difficult stuff, could you please tell our audience about yourself? What is important about and important to you, Kayla?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is just super important to me. I think this brings awareness. So super grateful to be a part of this. My name, like you said, Kayla Martinez. I was born and raised in Davenport, Iowa. I now reside close to my hometown still with my family. I'm married, my husband, and I have a 9-year-old daughter. So overall, average Midwesterner, dog lover. I have 2 Boston Terriers that I adore. Workaholic, for sure. I'll admit it. I'm a proud mom as well. I do work from home, cannabis software industry, which is definitely unique space to be in. And I'll say, unlike so many people who lost someone this same awful way, I do believe there's value in plant medicine. But of course, there's many caveats. So I'm looking forward to kind of, talking about that today. And I do think my mom's story is a testimony just of the dangers of Kratom. It's marketed as safe, holistic plant medicine. Truly, today, it's dirty and unregulated.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, too, for appearing. And I think your story will help all sorts of people. And as we raise awareness about these issues, could you tell us more about your mom, Jennifer, and the fun stuff and good memories of having her as a parent?
Yeah, absolutely. So my mom, Jennifer, honestly, she was truly, a joy to everyone who knew her. I know I might be biased being her daughter, but she's very social, had a lot of friends, good family. My mom became pregnant with me at just 18 years old, pretty young. So with that said, many family members, of course, alongside my mom took part in raising me, but my mom and I always had a special bond and relationship. One thing that my mom definitely just never failed to let me know, despite any ups and downs, was that, she was really proud of me. When I was just 11, her and my stepdad actually welcomed a daughter. So I was super stoked, finally had a sister, always wanted a sibling, didn't have one when I was a young kid. So some of my best life memories involving my mom include my sister and all 3 of us just spending time together. We all had a really close relationship. I'll say my mom and I definitely shared the same sense of humor. So my sister, even though she's much younger than us, she'd sometimes need to keep us in line. My mom had, one of the things I definitely remember, she had a hilarious laugh. I used to be kind of embarrassed when I was younger, just, people would say, oh, you laugh just like your mom. And especially when I really, get to laughing. But now I'm just grateful because that's one of the things I'm scared of. My mom is gone now and I never want to forget her laugh or her voice. Like I said, we had a lot of ups and downs throughout our whole relationship. But I will say, the good times, they always outweighed any struggles. She was, my mom, active in our community, award-winning, well-known cosmetologist in our area. She was admired by so many friends, clients for 30 years. She adored my daughter, loved being a grandma. She was a great person.
When I heard about your mother's story, my heart broke a little bit because she was born the exact same year as me.
Yeah, yes. Age and, too young to die. My mom was a very lively person, so can't help but think that, she's just too young to die. This shouldn't have happened.
Yeah. I understand she became addicted to Kratom. How did her Kratom use start off?
Yeah, definitely. Good question. So my mom, she struggled with alcohol and drug abuse throughout her adult life. So again, she was a young single mom struggling financially and despite her best efforts, she struggled on and off with her sobriety as well. So when she was sober, she was doing great. She would abstain from alcohol, drug use, successful in her career, wonderful mom, did great. When she was in a bad place, though, it would get really bad. So, she would want to hide this from people, of course, because to her it was embarrassing. She also had rheumatoid arthritis, so she experienced a lot of pain and flare-ups. So sometimes I think that also contributed. Just, she was in a lot of pain and just substances, to take that pain away. She met a lady through a friend who owned a local holistic shop that sells primarily Kratom. It sells Kratom in bulk, in their own packaging, no dosage directions. And they also sell Kratom, that's already packaged from other distributors as well. So with that, the owner of this shop had her own struggles with addiction and also pain management. So she marketed Kratom to my mom and everybody, in her community as a safe way to manage pain and also a safe way to cope with addiction, safe way to get high without any repercussions. So my mom became great friends with this woman. She began using Kratom at first in smaller recommended doses, but then eventually began using it in larger quantities, especially after recognizing just that Kratom in high doses mimics similar effects of opioids in some. So as many, people do, like I said, my mom had a lot of shame regarding her drug and alcohol use. So I think she used the Kratom to stay sober from other drugs and alcohol.
So what were the signs her Kratom consumption was starting to be a major problem?
Yeah, so, a year prior to her death, I was actually notified by a coworker of my mom's just regarding her concerns, primarily with my mom's behavior, but also her health. And she was aware of her Kratom use, even though my mom, tried to hide it. So she became aware of my mom taking Kratom in between clients. Again, cosmetologist, she does hair. And overall, people who worked with her noticed a change just in her behavior, her demeanor, and then also were worried about her frequently vomiting and having problems with her balance. So she was having dizzy spells and actually a couple falls as well.
Oh, wow.
So with that, I knew already about the Kratom use and had expressed my concerns, but it was something, my mom would kind of brush off. And then she would, of course, express, no, I don't use that anymore. It's not a problem. It's just something I would use for pain management, but I'm fine. So because she was having these symptoms and brushing off Kratom as being a cause and also lying about her use, she did begin seeing a lot of different specialists that her doctor recommended her to. So she saw neurologists, rheumatologists, oncologists, a psychologist regarding all the symptoms that she had. So in addition to what I've already expressed and symptom wise, she also was losing a lot of weight. She lost 80 to 90 pounds in less than a year leading up to her death. She had a really hard time keeping food down. Again, the vomiting, had zero appetite, just no desire to eat, which was, not like her. She struggled with her balance, began having falls. Her hair thinned tremendously. And she was also having trouble with her eyesight, blurry eyes. She definitely was having memory problems. And I can tell you just from my own observation, her personality was not the same. She wasn't the same vibrant, vivacious mom that I knew. Her voice changed. She spoke slowly. And while this was all going on, again, she swore up and down, I'm not using the Kratom anymore. I'm fine. But secretly, she was taking it in copious amounts many times a day. My stepdad knew about this, but my mom told him it was safe like cannabis, could do no harm. He believed her. And again, I think because of me asking her about her use, she knew that I just was a little uncertain about it, maybe not thrilled about it. And so that led her to then lie about using.
Knowing your mom your whole life, could you tell when she was drinking and when she was not drinking?
Oh, absolutely. So my mom was, I feel like there's different types of alcoholics and drug addicts, but some may go home, drink a case of beer, get up for work the next day, and that's the cycle. When my mom would use, it was all or nothing. We wouldn't see her for days. She was very ashamed of this. So, would try to hide it till she couldn't anymore, but very obvious, big difference in my mom sober versus my mom using, and against my mom using Kratom even as well. There was just a big difference in who she was normally and on substances, including Kratom.
Okay. And I know she was later hospitalized, but before that, did the doctors identify any other causes for her symptoms?
No. So despite seeing all of these specialists and of course her doctor, frequent follow-ups with her doctor, no, that's where I think a lot of medical professionals dealing with her, it kind of became frustrating because it's like clearly something is very wrong, but they did not know what it was. And my mom being in either denial, hearing every day, oh no, it can't be the Kratom, or again, maybe feeling guilty, not admitting it to her medical professional she was seeing. They had no idea. So then it kind of came up as, they didn't know what was wrong.
Later on, she was hospitalized, and then soon after that, she died on December 15th, 2021. And I'm sorry that anniversary of that date is coming up. Could you tell us about what happened during that period?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. Thank you. I appreciate that. Anniversaries, definitely, they're tough. And also, it's around the holidays. So I think it just has impacted and forever changed this time of year. I know not just for me, but for my family. So, but regarding hospitalizations, so my mom eventually, just in her poor state of health, like I explained previously, started experiencing some delirium and hallucinations, which of course added more concerns to an already growing list of health problems. She was taken by ambulance to the hospital, and upon admission, several tests, they did diagnose her with Wernicke's encephalopathy. So this condition is a brain condition, and I had never heard of it. Doctors assumed, though, that this was caused by alcohol consumption. So what this condition is, just background info, it manifests due to lack of thiamine, which is vitamin B1 in the body. Dangerously low thiamine can occur due to alcohol use. Yes, definitely. But also, with her dangerously low thiamine levels, they likely were due to constant vomiting and severe lack of appetite, which I had actually discussed with the medical examiner as well, after she had passed away. So again, doctors didn't know about her Kratom use. So they just, I think, made assumptions based on what they knew. My mom was discharged from the hospital after 10 days. So she was very ill. She had, she wasn't there for just a night. 10 days. She was under the care of a visiting nurse back at home, even though at this time she was so weak, she couldn't even walk. I mean, she wasn't even mobile. So the hospital did confirm, though, before they released her, her vitamin levels were stabilized. And again, this was 2021. So, hospitals, crowding, they basically, were like, there's nothing else we can do for her here in the hospital. We're sending her home. I did request that medical examiners check thiamine levels following the initial autopsy and toxicology report, just because, I started to wonder, like, oh my gosh, could that have had some contributing factor to her death? And this was before we received the death certificate. They did do this. And upon doing that, all vitamin levels, of course, including the thiamine B1, were normal and stabilized at the time of her death. So because Kratom doesn't show on drug tests, I believe doctors blamed her prior alcohol use just without having any way of knowing about the copious amounts of Kratom she was taking. I mean, that's not showing up on a drug panel or a drug screening. So they were blaming what they knew.
And after her death, in talking to your stepdad, were you able to look at her financial records and kind of get a
Oh,
sense of
yeah.
how much money she was spending and the amounts that she was taking?
Oh, yeah. And, I will say that in that regard, my mom was the one who handled all the finances in the family. I think a lot of family dynamics can be like that. One person kind of takes on handling, paying the bills, and that was my mom. So it was easy for her to hide the financial ruin and devastation that they were truly in. But all their money is and was gone. I don't know the exact amount of money, dollar amount spent, but I can tell you she went from having a successful career, money in the bank and in savings, to having nothing. So a lot of money went to the Kratom for sure. My
Yeah.
stepdad had no idea bad how bad it was, I think.
From the time when she started using Kratom to her death, how long of a period was that?
So it was about 2 years.
Okay.
She had started using the Kratom. And at first I wasn't in high copious amounts. It was more, I think, as it was prescribed, but eventually, just to get that same effect, that's when the dosage, from there continuously over that 2 years began to go up and up.
Historically, over her life, did she have any health issues?
Nothing remarkable besides the rheumatoid arthritis. So
Okay.
she was diagnosed with RA in her 20s. But again, she managed it, right? She was medicated for the rheumatoid arthritis, of course, being overseen by a doctor and a rheumatologist and everything. And she still was able to work with her hands every day. Being a cosmetologist, that's what you do. So it didn't interfere with her life tremendously, but definitely caused some pain and problems. Besides that, though, no, that was really it regarding medical conditions.
Do you know what kind of Kratom product she was taking?
Yeah, so she would take mostly, and most of this was found after her death. So upon going through her house, because of course we had a lot to reconcile after her death, a lot of things to clean out. My stepdad lost their house because of financial ruin due to money spent on Kratom. So, oh my gosh, found Kratom all over the house, green stuff everywhere. And so with that said, a lot of the product was packaged from the holistic health shop that she bought it from. But yeah, she would buy it there. So they prepackaged it themselves, and they would actually mix different strains together to make up their own. And it's not like this came in small bags. I mean, these were large bags of Kratom. And then she also purchased a product that they sold at this store because my mom recommended that they do. And I do have done a little bit of research on that particular product, actually. And it sounds like that product itself caused problems for folks who took it, and they basically took the product, rebranded it, started selling it as a different name. So definitely sketchy there too. But those were the two main type she would take.
It's nuts. Like, diners have more inspection,
Yeah.
and regulation, to prevent food poisoning than this product.
There's no other word for it than asinine. I mean, it's unfathomable. And maybe others don't agree, but those who have lost someone or had someone affected by Kratom, you just start to realize how messed up it is regarding the lack of regulation. It's not good. Scary.
And when she died, she was the age of 51?
Correct. Yep. 51 years young. Yes.
So what was the ruling of the cause of her death by the medical examiner?
Yeah. So medical examiner ruled my mom's death an accident. The sole cause was acute Mitragynine toxicity. She had no other illegal drugs, though, in her system, no alcohol in her system.
Do you know what the NGML level was?
So 710 ng per milliliter was the dose listed on the autopsy report. Now, they did mention in the autopsy report from my mom, just that they've seen deaths from Kratom that had a sole ruling of death by just Kratom itself, with amounts that were in the 200 range to, I think it was 10,000. So, there's definitely a range there, but they did say, definitely a high concentration of that kratom, more than an average consumer would have in their blood.
Who did the toxicology report? Sure the medical examiner sent it out.
Yeah. So that was done by a different lab. So yes, it was done by NMS Labs, which I know is in Pennsylvania, top forensic lab that conducts these types of autopsies, those that are for, unexpected or questionable deaths. And additionally, I do know that they have done some extensive, research or looking into specifically kratom deaths. So I am happy that I learned, the toxicology report did go to one of the top places to be reviewed. So that kind of just further affirms, knowing and accepting that, unfortunately, yes, it was the kratom, nothing else was remarkable in autopsy or in the toxicology report.
How did you feel when this first happened, and how are you feeling now 2 years later?
When I first found out, I was obviously, devastated, and I was shocked too. I knew that my mom was very sick, but my family and I never suspected she would pass away. I mean, it was very abrupt. I thought, okay, she's very ill, but this is going to get better. And that's the prognosis with the brain condition I mentioned previously that we and she was given. So initially, I mostly at first thought about the fact that she died at home alone on her couch. She didn't have family surrounding her. She was by herself. And I will say that, when she was found by a visiting nurse, because she did have visiting nurses come at the time. She was found in respiratory arrest. So nurse called 911, paramedics. So essentially she just went to sleep is how medical examiner explained it to me. It wasn't a heart attack or anything like that. It was respiratory depression. So after, her death and finding out of it, I will say that my devastation genuinely turned to anger. I honestly can't recall any time in my life when I've been as angry as I was when I got that call regarding the cause of death. I will say that from there, it was just shocking. Like, how could somebody die this way? Like, even I, having my concerns about kratom, didn't make a lot of sense to me. So now, I'd say anger definitely has turned to sadness, grief, worry. I wish I could say I feel better almost 2 years later, but I'd definitely be lying if I said that anger, confusion, grief and worry don't still touch my life daily. I worry for those who are uneducated or misled about kratom. And I worry about the state of this substance in general and how it's distributed today. It's not good. More people are going to die. And that's a thought that just doesn't sit well with me, of course. It's hard.
I could see how that'd be really emotional.
You feel helpless, It's,
yeah.
My mom is gone. I can't bring her back, but to feel so helpless and feel like you can't truly help others because this stuff's sold everywhere, at gas stations, down the street from everyone's home. Yeah, it's hard.
I believe you submitted a police report about the vendor who sold the kratom to your mom and explored filing a lawsuit. How have your efforts to pursue justice gone?
Yeah, so I did at first contact the police. I found out eventually inspect the business that she primarily purchased kratom from. So they did next to nothing just because simply there's no law against kratom in the state of Iowa. So of course, while they sympathized, with my mom passing away, they did tell me point blank, they have no control over kratom and they have to put efforts into the street drugs and other problems that they can attempt to control. So that was frustrating to hear. I have also contacted multiple lawyers who won't take my mom's case so far. My suspicion is that it has to do with her history of addiction. Unfortunately, it's stated in her autopsy report, her history of addiction. So it's frustrating and challenging just to understand and accept of course, because addicts are among those that Kratom lobbyists prey upon, I do continue to seek out lawyers and present documents attempting to find anybody who will take my mom's case. And I will say too, I've contacted my local and state legislatures just to share my mom's story. And I do continue to be in correspondence with them. Last thing I did, of course, this is probably assumed already, but I did file a report with the FDA as well.
And I understand actually specifically belittled your mother's death after it occurred. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, thank you. Definitely. I know this is something a lot of us who have suffered a loss of a loved one by Kratom have experienced. I personally was sent screenshots of a forum where I took an email that I had sent him and basically just pointed out, how delusional I am. Meanwhile, of course, responding to me directly with nothing but words of empathy, we want to work with you on this, we're on your team, just lies. I will say this was prior to me having any knowledge of who this abysmal man is. So with that said, it was a hard lesson learned for sure. It was at the time an intro into the big Kratom community and how absolutely relentless they are in keeping Kratom available, just of course with no regulation, no matter the cost.
I have some questions here to let you rebut and refute some of the crazy comments I'm sure you received online after your mom died. The first, we get this a lot on the podcast, but how about this notion that just by criticizing Kratom or the way it's regulated, that we are being selfish because Kratom helps so many people and our, quote, fear-mongering, unquote, is going to scare people away from this life-saving miracle product?
Yeah. So I will say, since my mom has passed, since I've become involved just in learning more about Kratom in general, I've probably received more hate comments in the last 2 years than I have in my lifetime. One thing that I can say is for sure, people do not want you to fuck with their Kratom. Sorry for the curse word, but they don't want you to mess with their Kratom. And, I understand that I'm unique in that avid cannabis advocate. I believe there is value to some forms of plant medicine, but research and regulation is paramount. It's essential. You cannot safely take an unregulated product, no matter what, and even if it's natural, without understanding there's potential repercussions. The problem is, in my opinion, many of our opinions here, I believe, many people in the Kratom community don't want to accept the problem, which is why they're so upset here. The relentless verbal abuse from the Kratom community, in my opinion, demonstrates the grip this substance truly has over them and how much money continue to count on filling their pockets.
Since your mom, like myself, had a previous history with addiction, that we should not blame Kratom. We're defective people. Kratom's innocent.
Yeah.
I think this is a particularly ridiculous thing to say, and especially to somebody that, had a death. But, babies born to Kratom dependent mothers, often have to be treated with morphine. And a lot of times people are just consuming Kratom after they become dependent just to deal with withdrawals, or their tolerance.
Right. This is the sad reality of how our society treats addicts. As I mentioned before, even under emergency hospital care, doctors blamed that brain condition my mom was suffering from the lack of vitamins, from lack of eating, on past problems with addiction. So my mom's own primary care doctor shamed her and asked her if she was using her previous drug of choice or alcohol just one day prior to her death, after my mom had called her with concerns. So, with that said, I think people are taking Kratom to cope with drug abuse. And if they are, they need to be very careful. My mom ended up taking so much that it killed her, sadly. And again, there was nothing else remarkable on her autopsy and toxicology reports. just the Kratom. So I just, I know people out there don't believe how dangerous it can be, but when something is unregulated, you have no guarantees of safety.
Anything else that especially drives you crazy to hear that you'd like to respond to?
Yeah, I mean, there's a laundry list. I feel like I'm not the only one who has heard it all, right? I've heard everything from no one can die from Kratom. I mean, obviously this is not true. My mom is dust in an urn. As sad as that is, I wish that wasn't the case, but I will trust a medical examiner any day over somebody who desperately wants Kratom to stay the way it is. Kratom's the same as cannabis. Again, this is so far from the truth. It could be packaged with feces as the main ingredient. You'd never know. There's no regulation. There's no disclosure required. I hear a lot, she must have had other drugs in her system. It was laced. That's what autopsies and toxicology reports are for. There were no other illegal drugs in her system. Kratom wasn't laced. I hear, you can die from anything in excess. You can die from drinking water. Well, not at this rate. Not in denial that, yes, people can die of freak accidents, but people don't die at this rate. It's not a coincidence here. And it's, especially when it's dispensed so irresponsibly. I'll also sometimes hear, again, kind of tying back into your previous question, your mom was an addict. It's her fault. She overused the Kratom. And that really drives me crazy because she wasn't just an addict. She was a person. She was loved and admired by so many friends and family. She had a purpose. She had goals. She owned a home. The extra layer of confusion that comes with a Kratom overdose and the pushback you get just from so many, it's difficult to sustain. But I think, the truth is most Kratom users, they'll agree that they will continue to take higher doses the longer they're using to get the same effect. That's common with many drugs, legal or not, natural, pharmaceutical. So, I know this won't be the last of questions that I get or, questioning my mom's death, but definitely something that I am equipped with answers because there are answers, to every argument, in my opinion.
The medical responders, they administered Narcan?
They did, actually. Yes, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. So, yeah, that's another one, that I sometimes do hear too. Like, it's fine. At least there's Narcan. That always works for people just in case. My mom was administered multiple doses of Narcan and it did nothing.
So I know pot can be addictive. It's not for everybody. How would you compare, the different safety profiles between cannabis and Kratom?
Yeah. So my stance is I want people to know too, I'm not here, even despite my mom's death, I'm not here to say plant medicine is bad. I can't say it enough. Regulation of Kratom is absolutely necessary or people are going to continue to die. Cannabis, for example, it's grown under conditions that are inspected. The product is inspected within the same exact state you're purchasing from. There's standards there. With Kratom, there's no standards. I would never recommend someone purchase a cannabis product. For example, I don't know if you've ever heard of Delta 8. Mm-hmm. You hear that sometimes, all these spice, different things. Those are not sold from a reputable licensed cannabis dispensary. So you shouldn't use them. Same thing with Kratom. Needs to be regulated in a similar manner. Otherwise, there's too many dangers there.
While the cannabis industry is more mature than the Kratom sector, and there's probably bad actors in cannabis too, are there things that your company or the field in general does pertaining to the way it sells its products, steps that businesses take to sell, substances in an ethical manner so that customers can make informed choices?
Yeah, so I think it's important just from the start, just to point out that cannabis, of course, it's not the right choice for everyone. Some people should just use it with caution, regardless if there's medicinal benefits or not. And I think that goes just, even for pharmaceutical medication. So just because it's legal within certain states doesn't mean it's to be used by all. So with that said, though, any reputable dispensary is going to seek to educate patients and customers, just not on the benefits, but also side effects. That's an important piece as well. So I was just going to say as well, I think that cannabis sometimes gets a bad rep for other reasons, but as a society, we're continuing to move definitely in the right direction with science backing up facts there. So Kratom, it's too new within the United States. There's just too many opportunities for something to go wrong. So with that said, things can go wrong concerning concentration, sanitation, concerning lack of education, manipulation, and just wishful hoping for a miracle cure and a safe way to get high. It's dangerous if there's no regulation involved there. So that's what cannabis has, in my opinion, that Kratom, the Kratom community using Kratom in general is missing. It's the regulation piece.
It's weird, with cannabis, I think society overreacted. There was reefer madness. It was overscheduled.
Absolutely.
And a lot of that was race-based. To me, Kratom seems to be an overcorrection for that mistake. Because
I agree.
I think it's great to society is seeing the errors of, drug wars and demonizing people for the substance that, because there's some arbitrariness, why is, meth illegal and, Adderall, which is Adderall is a similar, compound.
Right.
Still, there needs to be a regulated marketplace for the safety of the consumers and for vendors who want to sell this. The regulation is really important.
Exactly. And that's what I think is key. Like I said, with no regulation, you don't know what you're consuming. And that's what's scary. One dose could be different in concentration than another dose if there's no regulation involved. You just never know.
Are there some regulations you see with your work or in the sector as a whole that may be applicable to make Kratom sales safer?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that producing and growing Kratom locally is something that would be beneficial for sure. That just points to there being more control. Now, I understand that right now, difficult to do in the environment. I know there's been some attempts out there to do so. But with that said, keep trying. It's the safest way to guarantee a safe product. And then also rigorous inspections just regarding cultivation, manufacturing, of course, dispensing Kratom. That is pertinent as well. Controlling the dosage, like I said, the amount that is able to be sold to consumers, disclosing on packaging, dangers, dosage, etc. Licensing at the state level so that the vendor that is actually supplying Kratom to consumers is reputable. So I guess bottom line, there's so many opportunities just to make this a safer situation for everyone.
I know this is a tough one, especially someone who had a loved one that died from a Kratom related cause. I know I've talked to others in the similar, but the thought of Kratom being a harm reduction tool, especially when it's marketed to vulnerable populations like people like your mom who had a history of addiction.
Yes.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, where we're at today, it's completely irresponsible, honestly, just to suggest that public consumers utilize Kratom as a harm reduction tool. The reason I think that, again, I can't say it enough, it's unregulated. It's dangerous in the United States today. Taking Kratom for any reason, but, especially in higher doses, is gambling with your life, essentially, if there's no control of the potency, sanitation, and that goes for any product you're ingesting. There needs to be regulation and control there. It is imported from Asia illegally. Consumers have no guarantees regarding that the Kratom they're consuming is safe, regardless of what vendors or packaging might suggest today. So, and Kratom killed my mom, and she herself used it in a way as a harm reduction tool, as a pain management tool, and ultimately it took her life.
And there are a lot of more evidence-based harm reduction options. Not that,
Yes.
I mean, if you want to continue consuming the substance, cannabis might be a better option for some
There's just
people.
more research there. There's more research there. There's more science there. And, I'm not, even though I've lost a loved one this way, I'm not sitting here saying that one day down the road, will they get there with Kratom? Maybe, but right now, nobody knows. There's not enough time, research, etc. Nobody knows or can say for sure that there are any health benefits. That's essentially hearsay from people using the product themselves and based on experience. So,
and, there's Narcan. You can do needle exchange, fentanyl testing strips. There's all sorts of other harm reduction options.
Yes, which I'm here for. I think harm reduction tools are essential. I'm not here at all saying, oh, an addict is an addict. They just need to deal with it. Harm reduction is essential, but it needs to be safe. There needs to be testing. There needs to be science backing the safety.
Yeah. And is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap things up?
Yeah, ultimately, I just want to thank you so much for having me, of course, and letting me share my mom's story. Awareness, of course, is key here. So that's why I think that it's important to share stories. With that said, even though my mom's time was cut short here earthside by this devastating circumstance, I know that my mom is proud of me just for all my efforts to help educate and help other people. Sharing my mom's story is never going to bring her back. And I'm aware of that, but it could prevent someone else from experiencing what's unfortunately possible today due to lack of regulation. And that is accidental overdose by Kratom. So, no one should die this way. It's not right. And ultimately, I think today, like I had said earlier, one of my main worries is someone else dying like this.
I mean, and one of the things I think is really horrible is sort of the denial that Kratom use can cause death or be associated with death. There's just this giant myth. It's a really closely held belief by a large number of members of the Kratom community. They think it's all been refuted. It's all the deaths are fake. Somehow, like, medical examiners are being influenced by the FDA and somewhere Big Pharma has a hand in there. So it's
unbelievable. It's definitely an uphill battle for sure. And, it's not really more than holding anyone responsible even, which is a big part of it. Again, I can't say this piece enough either. I don't want anyone else to die this way. It's really unsettling to know somebody, your loved one, died from a tool that they themselves were using for what they thought was harm reduction. That's a hard thing to cope with. So with that said, I think that is also just what's frustrating, in this whole scenario in general. And it makes you just at the end of the day, it's not fair.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not fair that this happened. And then on top of it, you feel like, sometimes you get so much pushback. It's like people don't believe me, but ultimately at the end of the day, like I said, when you have the evidence sitting right in front of you, when it comes from labs that are reputable, a medical examiner, who's a doctor, at the end of the day, who to trust. So,
yeah, I hate this comment, that refrain I hear, like, well, just mind your own business. If you don't like Kratom, don't do it. It is your business. You had a family member that died from Kratom. So it is a concern to you, and it's a legitimate thing for you to speak up. It's not like you have to be quiet and go away because people don't like that fact.
Being in the position that I'm in, even in, my professional life with work, working in the cannabis industry, I think that does set me apart from some, in that you are so angry about the death that it's like, I don't, natural medicine can't be trusted, etc. I'm not here to say natural medicine is not good. There are benefits, but there's so much that goes into it before we can say it can be used for either harm prevention or medicinal reasons. And with cannabis, it's been in this country for years and years and years. With Kratom, we're not there yet. We're not even close. So I think it's wishful thinking from a lot of people too. Sounds too good to be true. People want a safe way to get high.
And that desire for option like that overlaps with this big profit motive of these
Absolutely.
corporations that want unregulated marketplaces to sell their product unfettered.
Knowing how much money goes into it, behind the scene. I mean, it's really mind blowing, honestly. Like, some certain industries and that there's tons of money behind it. But to even learn that Kratom, which isn't, not saying that the population of people using it isn't growing, but it's not widely used like, say, cannabis. With that, it's insane. There's so much money there. And that's a huge problem too. Money is always going to be the motivator for so many.
And then the products being mainstreamed and the access is just exploding.
The way it's produced today, the way it's distributed today, the lies that are fabricated about Kratom, more people will continue to die. More innocent people will lose their lives thinking they're using something to manage pain, to help with addiction, when really it's killing them. And that's sad.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I hope
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Same here. And I hope we honored the memory of your mother.
Yes, thank you. It's like I said, awareness is key. So this is very important and happy to do it. I'll do anything I can just to honor her memory. So thank you.
Okay.